NRA board member and reform advocate Phillip Journey on the group's surprise change of leadership, plus an interview with Reload member Brian Rohn. That and more in this episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast.
No, the devil's got no hold on me.
All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Gutowski. I'm also a CNN contributor and the founder of thereload.com, where you can head over and sign up for our free newsletter today. If you want to keep up to date with what's going on with guns in America, you can, of course, also buy a membership if you want to support the work that we do and get exclusive access to hundreds of pieces of analysis and original reporting that you will not find anywhere else. You also, of course, get this podcast a day early and the opportunity to appear on the show, which I believe we have a member segment for this episode today. So looking forward to that one. I am actually at the farm. I'm watching my mother's horses for the week. So forgive any, degraded quality in the video or audio of this podcast, but still trying to bring you important news, which is I think the top story of this week is the NRA. And a somewhat surprising turnout by the reformers at the NRA the board meeting, where we saw a number of reform candidates get elected to the top leadership positions in the NRA. And so to talk about that, we have one of the men who has been leading the NRA reform effort since really the beginning of this scandal back. I mean, it's been 5 years now, right?
Yeah.
I think 5, almost 6, really.
Yes.
And that's Phillip Journey, who's NRA board member. And welcome to the show, Judge. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me on, Steve.
Yeah, and can you just tell people a little bit more about yourself and this whole reform movement for anybody who needs to catch up?
My name is Phillip Journey. I'm a judge in the district court in Sedgwick County, Kansas, with Wichita being the center of it, the largest city in the state. Right now, I'm doing family law. I served on the board back in the 90s from 95 to 98, and then was elected again in 2020 after going to the members meeting in Indianapolis that was really a mess. And then I served 3 years there and was elected again. This was my first board meeting back on the board. We got sworn into the board on last Monday, just a couple of days ago.
Yeah. And we talked to you after the trial where, you were found to be a whistleblower who was retaliated against during this whole ordeal. You were at the time running on this campaign, this platform with was a total of 4, well, I guess 5,
yes.
Right? If you include Buzz Mills, who's already on the board. 5 people on a 76-person board. Now, you all got elected, and you were some of the top vote getters. I think you were actually the second most of anyone who ran this election. But that's still a pretty small minority. How did that translate?
Out of 76 on the board. Sure.
Yeah. How did that translate to you guys being able to do as well as you did?
Okay, so basically, Buzz was one of the parties that helped me with the motion in the bankruptcy case back in 2021 to hire an examiner and have him go in and look at the books. That did not happen because the judge dismissed the case, finding that NRA did not file the bankruptcy in good faith. So we're back to square one. Run out the term on my board, had a hiatus for a year, and got frustrated again. We basically organized people, NRA members all over the country. They gathered hundreds and hundreds of signatures for the 4 of us. And then they were submitted and we got on the ballot. That way, we did not get on the ballot by the normal route, which is the nominating committee.
Right.
And then we went out and we campaigned. I was working gun shows. I went to Tulsa, the biggest gun show in the United States, handed out pamphlets. We had mailers we sent out to people we believe to be voting members of the NRA. It appears to be very successful. The reality is that 2/3 of the ballots cast had Rocky, Marshall, and my name on them.
Yeah.
And so that's pretty darn good. I was very happy with that.
Yeah. And you think that sent maybe a message to the rest of the board that they kind of took into account during this board meeting?
It's very clear to me from the comments from fellow board members and the way they were behaving that it did make an impression. And I think it made a favorable one.
Right, because
This was a pretty pleasant weekend for me, as opposed to what they usually were.
yes, because you've been cursed out at these meetings before, as I understand.
Shouted down and yelled at, and ostracized. It kind of got like middle school there for a while, but I guess I'm back with the in crowd, or we made a new in crowd.
And so, one of the interesting things to me, and maybe something you can speak to here is, you seem pretty happy with the outcome of this election. You people that were put up as reform candidates against the nominating committee candidates won 3 of the top 4 positions in NRA leadership, including the first vice president, second vice president, and I think most importantly, the EVP. That's the position that Wayne LaPierre used to hold. Doug Hamlin won against Ronnie Barrett. So, but at the same time, none of those guys who won were people on that reform ballots, that sort of platform that you ran together on. Buzz Mills lost his race for president to Bob Barr. So why, can you just walk people through why you're still satisfied?
Let me explain how it all came about. Okay, see, the 3 of us, well, Rocky and I were out. We both left the board in 23 at the end of the Indianapolis meeting. And at least I did. I think Rocky left the year before. But anyway, be it as it may, Buzz Mills was still on the board. And so while Buzz was on the inside, working this coalition and putting Humpty Dumpty together, Rocky and I and Jeff Knox and Dennis Fusaro were on the outside working the membership. And so when we got back on the board, I think our performance certainly on the ballot certainly said a lot to the other board members. And almost universally, they said, welcome back. I questioned a couple of them, but, all in all, I think that Buzz did an absolutely excellent job putting Humpty Dumpty together. And that's how we were able to prevail also on the nominating committee. And we certainly got several slots on the executive committee so we can keep track of what's going on.
Yeah. How did those break down? Right. So first of all, let's just go through the election results here. You got, like I said, 3 of the top 4 leadership positions, but 2 of those are also going to be on what's called the Special Litigation Committee. So that oversees.
That's my understanding of how it works from when we created that back in 21.
And that oversees the legal strategy for the New York case, and I guess for a number of other cases as well. Is that right?
That's my understanding. Yes. The new EVP has, of course, changed and discharged Mr. Frazier from being general counsel, and has picked another attorney from inside NRA to be his general counsel. I think that's a first step. I think that there's a lot of concern about the Brewer firm and what they're doing and how much they're getting paid and what kind of value we're getting for that. Right. It's obvious that their performance in the trial courts has not been what we would like, but it's the decision of others that I really don't have an input into, except perhaps as a little voice out here in Kansas saying, hey, what about this? So, it's all kind of in flux right now. It's a big, it's a great big knot that's been tied, and it's going to take a little while to untie it. And we may or may not be happy with that. The clock is ticking, though, because the second half of the New York Attorney General trial starts supposedly on around January 15th, 16th, and runs for 2 weeks. I think NRA would be better off if we could just settle that somehow, rather than go through the expense of the trial. I don't know that we could get that done without other counsel. I would think from past experience that it might be a good time to find a different pony to ride in the middle of the stream.
So just to give people some background there on some of the folks you're talking about, John Frazier was both the secretary of the NRA and the general counsel.
Yes.
And he was found to have lied on reports for the NRA during the jury section of the New York civil trial.
Yes.
And then Brewer is the outside firm that represents the NRA in that trial and in most of their litigation, including the Supreme Court case, although the ACLU has taken over that. But it's also been a controversial firm among reformers like yourself because they've been paid over $100 million at this point. And you've had, as you said, I guess you haven't been satisfied with the outcomes.
No,
that they've
and
reached.
the reality is too that the whole falderall that it blew up at the annual meeting in 2019 was about that same firm, was about Brewer Firm, and Ollie North, as president, wanted to look at their billings, and then the whole thing fell apart, and the nominating committee cut Ollie off from being president a second year, and then he left. He's never come back.
Yes. The Brewer Firm has been at the center of a lot of this since the very beginning. The Ackerman McQueen fight. Brewer is actually Bill Brewer is related
the one that started
Angus
it.
McQueen.
Yeah,
or is married to his daughter. But yeah, so there's a whole dynamic there. But
it's like Peyton Place. Yeah.
So there's potential now for change to happen with representation at the NRA, although you're not sure that that's actually going to take place. That's not set in stone by any means at this point.
I know several people have expressed that desire, but the practicalities and the methodology of getting it accomplished are still to be determined. I hope that we can get competent counsel to help represent the NRA and find different representation. But, that's kind of like one judge's opinion. It's for the Court of Appeals to look at.
Sure. And obviously Frazier has already been moved from general counsel to just secretary now, and there's no new general counsel. That's the first substantive change that Doug Hamlin has made as EVP. Can you talk a little bit about the nominating committee? You said that you think that the reformers got some people on that. Can you just explain what the nominating committee is and why it matters so much?
Sure. The nominating committee matters because it's the one of two ways to get on the ballot for the board of directors. The nominating committee also makes recommendations to the board for other boards like the Firearms Civil Rights Legal Defense Fund, the NRA Foundation, the Special Contributions Fund. Those all have their own separate little boards that can come from a mixture of board members and non-board members. And the nominating committee is set up the same way. The nominating committee is 6 board members and 3 non-members. Now, I nominated Dwayne Liptak of Magpul, who had been on the board for quite some time. And he was elected as one of the non-board members to the nominating committee, along with 2 others. And then there were 6 board members that were elected. From my count, I count 5 out of 9 that were the ones for the reform candidates list. So we got 2 of the board members, and then we got all 3 of the non-board members on the board.
And this was also how you could kind of tell who was sort of old guard, whatever you want to call them, the previous leadership candidates during the leadership elections, and who were the reformer candidates, because the nominating committee was controlled by the previous leadership till now, and their candidates were the ones who lost everything except for the president race in these top 4 positions. So
yes,
just to give people some more insight there as to how I'm like judging these things as far as previous leadership versus reformers, or however you want to label people. But and then executive committee, can you explain that one a little bit?
Okay, the executive committee takes the place of the board when the board is not in session. So if something comes up, so if something comes up between the board meetings, the executive committee decides the answers, then makes a report to the board so the board can review what they've done at the subsequent board meeting. So it acts like a board and fills the shoes of the board when the board is not in session.
Okay. And you think that making progress on those committees sets up perhaps further reforms down the line as well?
Well, it certainly helps us keep track of what's going on inside the building, to have reform candidates able to talk to us candidly about what they observed and what the questions were and things like that. It's important to have that representation on those, even if we don't have the majority on them. And it's just like being on the Special Contributions Board or the Foundation Board of Trustees, which we know had its own set of issues.
Mm-hmm. So when do you think people can expect to see additional changes made, and what should people look for? Those who are still waiting, perhaps, to come back after corruption issues with Wayne. He was obviously found to have taken $5.5 million from the NRA and paid to pay towards his own personal expenses on things like private flights. But I think a lot of people are still looking to see, all right, what are the signs going to be that things are actually changing?
If we could get the New York case settled with a consent order that, puts some restrictions on us, perhaps, or requires some communication back and forth. So if anything untoward happens, they know about it, which is fair. I think that, not being the one that's making the decision or the one that's in the negotiation, if they're ongoing right now, which I hope they are, those are the things that I think we should look for. We should look for resolution of the case in New York. Hopefully it won't go to trial in July. Now it's my understanding that a continuance has been requested by Wayne, and they want to put it off an extra 2 weeks, which will just play havoc with my calendar, because I've had these last 2 weeks of July blocked off for a couple of months, and I've filled on either side. Right now I'm setting evidentiary hearings in March and September. September and August. So yeah, that could be a real problem. That happened to me in the bankruptcy. They kicked it out a week, and that was tough too. So we'll see. We'll see.
Okay. And so you would point to
I would point to the New York trial and to see if other things can, that's the only thing that I know that's really on the horizon. That's a big boogeyman coming at us. I think that it's going to take a little while for everybody to get their sea legs under them. I'm going to ask everybody to be patient. If you're up for renewal, please renew your membership. We need to keep the ship afloat. I don't want to have to keep bailing, as the water's coming in right now faster than it's going out.
Yeah. Well, speaking of which, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the 2023 annual report, which was handed out at the meeting. And the numbers are not good. It appears that membership dues were down $21.4 million in 2023 compared to 2022. Total expenses exceeded total revenue by $26.8 million. And then, let's start with those. What do you make of that? That's continuing a downward trend.
Sure. As I predicted, I think on the show before, and I've certainly written about it or whatever, that the rate of change continued to increase. We've got to turn that around right now. When you look at 17, it's here, 18's here, 19's here, 20's here, and we're on the vertical drop right now because it's like a big curve. We've got the membership need to know that there are good people in places of authority and decision making, that we are dedicated to being good stewards to your money, that we will do the very best we can with this, and we've got to stay alive so that we can rebuild the association. What was it, 3 years ago when the bankruptcy was dismissed? I said this was tragic because the next one's going to be real. I'm afraid it's pretty close to getting real.
Yeah. Speaking of that, what was also disclosed in the annual report was actually from earlier this year. The NRA has sold off in 2 different transactions $44.6 million worth of assets, which they used in part to pay down line of credit at the bank that they do business with. And then the rest, it just says, went to the operating fund. Where that money went from there. Yeah. Where that money went from there, of course, a lot of it went to the attorneys. So, because that's the number one expense. The number one line item was administrative legal fees at $48 million this year, or 2023. So, and that we can all talk about the source of why we've had to spend that much money, because of the mistakes made by others. But we've got to get out of that. We got to get back to the business of doing what NRA does. And that means we have to restore the funding.
We have to hire the people, and we have to start the programs back up again, because most of them are pretty much in mothballs, as far as I can tell. We'll know more by our next board meeting. This one was just basically about the elections. We'll get more data, I hope. With the new EVP, the board will be much better informed, I expect, than we have been in the last 3 years. That's for sure.
Can you tell us a little bit about the new EVP in your opinion? Doug Hamlin, he's run the publications division at the NRA, so he's not an outsider or anything. He hasn't been a public reform advocate to this point. What's your opinion of him? Can you tell us a little bit about him?
Well, the opinion that I have and that I've heard from others is essentially that he's a good manager, that he's been able to keep the magazines going well, that he works and plays well with others, that, he can be collaborative. He can be, I think he has an insight into how the association is run and where all the levers of power are, because he's been there long enough that he's been able to gather that kind of information. And because of his past experience, we thought that he could hit the ground running because he knows where everything is and what is. He's not going to have to learn the job. He's already got all the information necessary to do it. And I believe he's motivated to do it too. I had a good conversation with him this last weekend. And that's one of the reasons he got my vote.
Okay. I invited him to come on the show. Haven't heard back yet, although he did talk to me after being elected at the board meeting. So that was a good sign, I think.
Yes, I think so too.
Could be more willing to speak and answer questions than previous leadership has been. And he did promise many things along the lines that you're talking about: transparency, change in direction, a new NRA. So
all the votes we took last weekend on the day before yesterday on the board meeting, I think the very first vote was the most instrumental one. And that was where we refused to go into executive session, because that's the way they have done business in the past. And we are going to be open and transparent. And we were able to block that request. There was an appropriate executive session on serious financial issues like we're talking about here today, and some personnel stuff, as I recall. But most of the reports were given outside of executive session, and the election was outside of executive session. So the members would get to know exactly what went on in the meeting.
Yes. Members were allowed in for these elections, and they were, that was one of the things that Hamlin pointed to as an example of the way they're going to act in the future. Obviously, I will certainly be following you all to make sure that's.
Yeah. But we'll see how Bob Barr does. Bob Barr is kind of an unknown quantity. My impression was that he is certainly aligned with Cotton and company, but when he's standing there all alone, and he's there with he's still got to make the decisions and make the calls and get along with the officers and the staff. So let's hope that the staff are treated better than they have been recently, because I know there was a lot of dissatisfaction with that from the people I've spoken to that are NRA employees. They seem pretty happy Sunday night in the hotel lobby. Yeah. They seem Monday night.
You interact with the staff?
Yeah, they seemed pretty happy Monday night after the board meeting in the hotel lobby.
And to that end, what are some of the long-term goals you have now for the organization in this reform effort? Obviously, we're filming this on Wednesday, so the election just happened 2 days ago. It's probably going to take more than a week to implement all these things.
Yeah.
What do you want to see?
It's honestly, it has been deteriorating over 3 to 5 years, if not longer, and it'll probably take a couple of years to build it back up. Reality is that we have yet to reestablish trust with the membership. That's part of why I'm doing this interview today, because I want them to understand that there are good people there, and we're really going to try to make it work. And it will take time to find the people, because I'm sure the people that have been laid off or fired because they didn't do what somebody wanted or something, they've probably gone on in their lives. They've probably got new employment. I know Mr. Ouimet has. So, for example, and I don't know that they're going to be able to come back. And so, we really need to expand association's finances so that we have the means to start getting these different programs back online. And it's more expensive to restart it than it is to maintain it. So I expect it'll take quite a bit and quite a bit of time to rebuild things and get procedures in place and, get the rhythm of operation going.
Yeah. To that end, I mean, the NRA's reputation has really taken a beating over ththese last couple of years.
And justifiably so.
Yeah. And so, it seems like it's going to take a pretty significant effort to reverse that, to get people to even understand that there's been a change.
Right now, I think we need what I'd call a bridge donation, just to give us enough working capital so we can demonstrate the truth that we are there for the membership and that we'll be working on getting the programs back up and running and try to get out of this boondoggle of a court case and get on with the business of the NRA.
And, do you have any specifics that you could give us on things that you'd like to see changed? Contractors you don't want to see getting work from the NRA anymore?
Well, I think yes, I think that once we really get in a position where we can, that we should review all of these contracts, that we should review all of the vendors. And because a lot of them have been operating for an extended period of time without any reasonable oversight from staff or the board. And, but that's a long process to try to go through all those contracts and try to evaluate these different vendors and look at putting new services or transferring old services to a new vendor out for bid. It shouldn't be a buddy. Hey, I've known him for 10 years. I'm sure he can do it. Just pay him what he wants. It should not be like that. It should be vendors that are vetted, that have a proven track record of success with fundraising, for example. And then they should be balanced against each other and see who's going to offer us the best return on our investment to try to get these things done. Often they get paid, for example, like per phone call or something like that. But if they're out there just dialing for dollars and they're dialing numbers that aren't working, somebody needs to check on that. Or if they're calling a life member and asking him to renew his annual membership, that needs to stop. And I've had like 3 of those contact me in the last 3 weeks saying, I'm a life member, Phil, and they're asking me to renew my annual. And, there's obvious problems there with the databases, and there's some work that needs to be done. Not being one inside the building today, it's a little tough for me to do much more than speculate.
Yeah, because essentially every major contractor for the NRA, from MMP to InfoCision
they've been there for decades.
They've all come under intense scrutiny during this scandal, and have had significant questions raised about their operations and their deals they have with the NRA.
That's right. They were the sources for the boat in the Bahamas and all kinds
MMP,
of little perks and trips to Africa or whatever that they did. And I think we've got to go through this process, and it's going to take time. It's just going to take time. We're going to have to get the New York case behind us. We're going to have to perhaps get new counsel in that, I hope. I don't know if we're going to be able to or not. It's decisions that are made by people outside. It's above my pay grade right now because board members don't get paid. But
well, they shouldn't.
Yeah.
Right?
That's right. Well, at least we're not supposed to be paid. Right. But I think that stopped too. It
has, at least according to the latest reports, the only one who was getting paid still a significant amount was Marion Hammer, and
that stopped December last year.
Stopped as well.
Yeah.
So that does seem to have stopped, or at least it's not being reported in what they hand out at the meeting, which was always also another problem. But just turning to the political side of the NRA for a little bit here. This suffering the same sort of issues that the overall organization has had, which is a lack of fundraising. We just saw the numbers come in from the FEC for last month, and they were very bad compared to the previous cycles that the NRA has raised money in. Still able to draw Donald Trump, the presidential candidate for the Republican Party, to your events. So you still certainly have a significant amount of influence in the space, but I would say it's fair to recognize that it's fallen off quite a bit. You've had Chris Cox leave, you had Jason Newmay leave. What do you foresee on the political side?
Okay, well, on the political side, I see probably the roughest election cycle for Republicans and conservatives in my lifetime. And it's not because of the gun issue. It's probably because of abortion. NRA members should understand that the NRA PVF, the Political Victory Fund, can only accept dollars from members and is only used to either send money like directly to a candidate, like a donation, or to do third-party advocacy as an independent entity in the race. For example, we all see the ads. Well, Senator so-and-so is just doing a great job. Why don't you send him a little note and say he's doing a great job? Or he's doing a terrible job and send him a note he's doing a terrible job. But we've got to get out there, because if trends hold as I see them right now, it looks like the Republicans won't be able to hold the House. The Senate is a little iffy whether they can get that extra one. That one, there's some hope there with a couple of the people that aren't running again. And it does look pretty favorable, for example, in Montana to beat the Democrat there, and Ohio looks pretty good too. So, it's hopeful. What happens on a presidential level is still pretty much in flux, honestly. The disposition on the court cases could affect that race. We'll see what the jury deliberations are in New York there pretty soon, I expect. Politically, I think that it's clear that NRA has been outspent in almost every election cycle by our political opponents since 18, as memory serves. And the Political Victory Fund is...
NRA actually outspent the gun control groups, yeah.
Well, that's good. All right.
But this time around, they're falling behind.
Well, that's good. But, it's all absolutely dependent on what NRA members, out of the goodness of their heart, donate to the PVF or to ILA, because other people can't donate to those. And that's why it's set up the way it is. I don't know what the status is on the super PAC either. That was not part of the conversations I remember from the board meeting. So it may be idle. It may not. I don't know. So, it's going to be a tough election cycle, and NRA needs to be fully charged and ready to go. And right now we're not that way, and it looks pretty tough.
Yeah. Similar to the rest of the organization, I suppose. But, on the politics front, this whole reform effort, this change of leadership, do you expect any different sort of approach in how the NRA deals with political issues, or the focus of the NRA, anything like that?
Well, I don't think we're going to replace, sorry, phone's ringing. I don't think we're going to replace our, the people that are making the decisions. I think that, like, for example, Isla PVF has made the decision to endorse Trump. I don't see that changing. And they are yet to issue endorsements on Senate and congressional races, because their questionnaires are probably not, like, they won't even send the questionnaire to Kansas until after the filing deadline. So, and that's like June 3rd or something like that. I know I'm going next week to go refile for my office as a judge. So write that big check.
Sure. Because, obviously the NRA kind of gets a lot of criticism from either side in its political approach to the issue you get it from the left and the right, oftentimes in how the NRA either does or doesn't approach gun control legislation. And so that's another thing where it seems there could be a change, but that hasn't really been the focus of what you guys are looking for in this reform effort, right?
Those kinds of because those kinds of decisions are made over at ILA, and as the board of directors of the NRA, we oversee the C4, and the ILA is kind of like a little subsidiary of it. And that is essentially the executive vice president's job to oversee the director of ILA and to fire him if he has to. And they need to kind of stand apart so that there's no coordination, especially like with other candidates or something like that. Yeah, that's a big no-no too. But the board really does not get involved or have an input into the grading of candidates or the decision making of who gets a donation or the orange postcards in the mail form. So that's,
Sure.
I mean, we can call and ask and say, hey, don't forget Congressman Bob. But that's about the extent of our influence there, to kind of be a little pest.
Okay. But I just mean, this whole reform effort, this change, new NRA,
I think
it's not necessarily
okay.
a change in the political stances or things like that.
The 4 for reform, the reason there's 4 is because I couldn't find 5, I think that this next year, we need to, and I told my friends in the 4 that we need to each go out there and try to recruit 2 solid candidates. Better to recruit 4 solid candidates for the 2025 board elections and see if we can continue the trend. And I mean, we've shown we can make it work, that we don't have to have the nominating committee to win positions on the board. We ran a very different campaign than what we've seen in the past, using some innovative technology that apparently was very effective. And then, we did one-on-one outreach. Like I was working gun shows, and I know Frank Tate was helping us too, working Pennsylvania, and we were all over the place. So we had people in Arizona and California and Alabama, and I think we got petitions from probably 30 or 40 different states. And so trying to build on that and to expand our numbers on the board is our next opportunity is next year in 25. And the cycle for electing that board has just started. So we'll see what we can do.
All right. Well, look, I appreciate you taking some time to talk to us and give us an update on the board elections and how this all turned out and your view of it. Because you, like I said at the beginning, you're one of the people who has been a leader in the sort of NRA reform movement from the beginning. And now it seems like you've kind of finally got to the point where you wanted to be.
Thank you so much. And I think it's also notable that we won the 76th director place at the meeting too. And that was basically like 3 of us out there handed out stickers and trying to get people to go vote. It's amazing at the annual meeting where we have 70,000 plus people go through the doors. 500 of them vote for that 76 director, or 600.
I think it was only like 212 that.
Yeah, 212 won. Right. But it was between 7 candidates. So, yeah, I know. But the board election should have better participation too by mail. I mean, we had 77,000 ballots cast, something like that, out of 2.5 million delivered.
Right. Yeah. And I think that says something in of itself about the uphill battle you guys are facing here.
Yeah, it's hard for people to pay attention. We don't make national news, and it's hard for them to understand what's going on. And the context is everything in trying to divine what may come in the future too. So it's important that everybody try to stay aware and follow things like MLand or you, and there's lots of information out there, and get involved. Talk to your local board members, see what you can do to help.
But overall, you're happy with the outcome.
Let me say I'm satisfied. I would have been happier if Buzz had won as president. That would have made our path much simpler. It's funny how those votes flipped. Buzz was the first officer to be voted on, and he lost 30-37. And then the next one, we won 36-30. And
it was a dramatic turnaround. Yes,
that I put a lot of thought into that, and that's one thing I like about driving to Dallas, because I've got plenty of time to think. And what I'm thinking is, Buzz really wanted to continue the war on the board, and part of his plan included some pretty harsh things. And I think that those 6 don't want the war; they want a truce. And on the board of directors. And I'm ready to do that if we can all work together in good faith. And we have to move forward from there.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I think we're going to head over to our members segment now. It was one of my favorites. So appreciate you coming on and giving us your perspective.
Thank you so much.
Okay, it's time for, once again, another one of my favorite segments, the member segment, where we get to talk to some folks here who are the ones that make the Reload possible. We get to know our community a little bit better through these podcast interviews. It's one of the perks of membership at the Reload. So, if you don't have a membership, might be a reason to pick one up. But this week, we've got with us Brian Rome, who's a relatively new subscriber, right? A relatively new member to the Reload. How are you doing, Brian? Welcome to the show.
I'm doing pretty good. I would say new member, long-time watcher. I've been probably watching, reading, listening for about a year now. Figured finally pull the trigger and get the membership going.
Awesome. Well, we're happy to have you on board and appreciative of your support as well. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself? Give us a little bit of background. Where you, what area do you live? And I think you have the student discount because you're enrolled in college as well. Can you just tell us a little bit about that?
So I live in New Hampshire. I'm going to be starting law school this fall. So got the student email for the student discount. Right now I'm working at a law firm, but I used to live down in Connecticut. Then I went to school in Massachusetts, and I keep moving north. I'm going to stop before I hit Canada, though.
Yes, there you go. New Englander. That's good. I'm from Pennsylvania originally, so a little bit further south than New England, but not too far away.
Still Northeast.
Yes, it's absolutely still the Northeast. A little bit more of your four-season weather in Pennsylvania, but I prefer the cold anyway, so I like New England. But yeah, so what about your background with guns or gun news? What is it? Did you grow up with firearms, or do you have any firearms? Or so don't have to get too deep into it. I'm just interested in your background here.
So, like I said, I grew up in Connecticut. So, for growing up with firearms, no. I have been interested in firearms for a long time. Ever since what started watching Forgotten Weapons column. If you haven't watched that episode, he's got one. Started watching him back probably like 15-ish, and ever since I've just been more and more interested. I didn't start shooting until I was 21. That's when in Connecticut you can get your handgun license. You could get a rifle license 3 years earlier, but it's a lot of effort, and you can only buy long guns. So I figured wait the 3 years. Since then, done a lot of shooting. 23 now, so probably shot, I want to say, at least 9,000 rounds in the few years that I've done this. I had a little opportunity to do a bunch of training classes for free, minus the price of ammo. So did a lot of that.
That's always a good arrangement if you can get it. I mean, it's similar to my story. I didn't start shooting until later in life, actually after college. So, it's not everyone grows up around firearms or grows up shooting. So it's always an important thing. And not everybody who subscribes to the Reload is a gun owner or goes out and shoots, but I think a lot of them do, like yourself. And so you mentioned Forgotten Weapons as one of the reasons you got interested in firearms. Obviously Ian, who's been on the show a couple times, great dude. Always enjoy having him on. He kind of focuses a lot on obviously the history of guns, but also sort of the mechanical aspect of firearms. Was one of those two things what really caught your interest?
Yeah, it's definitely mechanics and just weird guns. I figured this might come up, so I actually got a demonstrative over here.
Nice
this is
visual.
USB compact, but it's got the LEM trigger in it, which is, you gotta actually clear this.
Always good. Yes, especially on the internet, people will know.
But it's got the LEM trigger, which is a really neat system. It's kind of like halfway in between striker fire, single action only, and double action.
That is interesting.
There's only a few companies that make something similar to this now. I know Daewoo used to, and Lionheart Industry, again, still safe. But it's got a really light take up at a small point, and then short.
And a clean break there. That is
And the interesting part is when the hammer's cocked, it's actually flat. So for carrying, it's kind of like if you've ever seen the Glock mods where you have a little thing on the back plate, not the Glock switches, but
Right.
it's something you can depress with your thumb. So when you're holstering it,
Oh,
it
yes.
forces the gun to not fire.
Yeah,
Kind of
I've
like
seen
that,
those.
except factory option and hammer fired.
That's interesting. So you're definitely into the more technical side of firearms, the more mechanical side, and and even to the point where you're buying these unique firearms as part of it. That's really cool. It's certainly always something that I find appealing about firearms that I think doesn't get talked about a lot in coverage of firearms. So there's a lot of things we talk about with self-defense or even the political philosophy of an armed populace, right? We don't discuss as much the sort of mechanical appeal of these devices. I mean, they're intricate mechanical devices and I think that is something that can get somebody interested in firearms just as easily as any of the other aspects of gun ownership.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the biggest attractants for me, that in law. Just like with the LEM, it's such a simple system. I'm surprised it's not more popular just because I feel it really is one of those like best of all worlds, but no one's looking at it type things.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of those things sometimes in mechanical systems where you might have even if something you've developed is superior technically to what has been adopted en masse, it could be, you still have to overcome other factors like cost or the complication. It's always fascinating. I think it shows up a lot in your sort of better AR category, where like there's been all kinds of guns over the years, ACR or the SCAR or whatever.
Yeah.
Where they make these technical improvements on the AR design, which is pretty old at this point, right? It's from the 50s, but never quite reached that level of so much better that it's going to justify people replacing their ARs or the investment that the industry has made into producing ARs at scale. So they're much less expensive than they're all technically kind of superior alternatives.
1% better and twice the price.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's always it's interesting in how that stuff goes. I mean, you see that in any mechanical product, cars or refrigerators or whatever you look at. There's always going to be that aspect to it. But and so you're also going to law school, so you have that the law side of this presumably is a big part of your interest as well.
I know back when I was in high school, I had a civics class, and we were all doing debates with other students, and the topic that I was debating was the Second Amendment. And in Connecticut, I figured, all right, let's look up the Connecticut gun laws and see what it is for the debate. And I figured, what's the best place to start? Read the law. Bad place to start. I figured I'd sit down, read the Connecticut assault weapons ban. And the more you read that, the less sense it makes. You start seeing weird things in there. Like I just went back and looked at it the other day. There's a restriction on threaded barrels is a common one. In the law, it specifically mentions threaded barrels that can be used to accept a vertical foregrip, which
that's not
I feel like there's one
works.
gun that's like that, but it's weird.
Some of those laws, especially the assault weapons bans and how they sort of sometimes they get weird because they're filled with a lot of what obviously opponents would call loopholes. People will take advantage of these gaps in the law or however you want to phrase them, because I don't know that gaps in the law is always there's the way people talk about loopholes can be kind of ridiculous sometimes, especially like the gun show loophole. To me, it's not really a loophole because that's how the law was designed to work. It was intended to cover
some things are oversights, and then some things are specifically cut out to make sure that they're not touched by it. And so calling everything a loophole obviously doesn't make a lot of sense, but certainly there these, especially the assault weapons bans, where you're trying more to ban a concept of a kind of gun that lawmakers don't like. And so you go, especially California is a perfect example of like how they're constantly fighting with the industry or people who've
found ways to comply with the law that the lawmakers don't like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So
I'm sure judges all love that.
Yeah.
There's all this like hyper-textual interpretations. I know one, the Fifi, is like Fix It For You, just a small magazine in the pistol grip of an AR.
Yep.
Counting as the Fixed magazine, which
Right.
textually, yeah, that makes sense. Not with California judges, though.
Right. Yeah. So there's always to varying degrees of success.
Yeah.
People try to comply with these laws in creative ways, I guess you could say. So is that an area of law that you plan to go into, or is it just sort of one of your interests?
It is probably my top interest for fields of law. I'm also interested in like fair use IP law. That's the one that can actually make money in. But I like gun law more. It's a very interesting field of law right now.
Yeah.
It's massively expanding.
Oh yeah, for sure. After
like before I started learning, when I started getting into like learning about gun laws, there was of course the two major Supreme Court cases. We had Heller, of course, and then we had Miller, and then we had McDonald and Gaetano. But those were the two big ones.
We're still waiting on Rahimi, although maybe by the
Rahimi's,
time this goes up, Rahimi will come down. I doubt it.
And bump stock, we also got that in there.
Yeah,
and we got a few.
Not a Second Amendment case, though.
Not a Second Amendment, but gun litigation.
But not a lot, to your point, not much in the way of Second Amendment jurisprudence from the Supreme Court to this point in time. Now, to be fair, there weren't any federal gun laws until the 20th century. Yeah. So that's part of the reason why there's not so much jurisprudence on this. But
we saw this explosion happening just right now. So much is expanding.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so maybe there's more opportunities down the line once you're done with law school. I guess we'll see how that shakes out. I would expect there will be. In fact, we just had Jonathan Adler on the show not long ago, and he was talking about how while the court is taking way fewer cases overall than it used to, it's taking a much higher percentage of gun-related cases now. So it does seem to be a growth area in at least in constitutional law. If that's
I think recently we were down to like 60s somewhere for cases being taken up.
Yeah, but increasingly they're taking up we're waiting on Rahimi, which is a Second Amendment case. We've got the NRA's case. That's a First Amendment case, but it's First Amendment advocacy of gun rights.
Impactful, but not necessarily two-way.
Yeah. But then you've got the bump stock case. You've got the and a bunch of cases after that, the pistol brace case. They're waiting to potentially hear to decide on whether to hear AR-15 ban case, assault weapons ban case. So there's a lot that they're taking up or considering right now, and it's becoming a higher percentage of the overall workload of the Supreme Court, and so that's interesting. But so maybe that'll continue. Maybe there'll be more opportunities in the future. But you have you're just getting started in law school, so you have a couple of years to go. I'm thinking, right? Yeah.
Right now I'm going to be starting in the fall, but I'm working at a law firm doing some basic paralegal stuff.
And who's that?
The resume.
Who you have there with you?
Oh, did I not mention this yet? This is Shay. He's a Bernese Mountain Dog. He is 11 weeks old now.
He's small now, but
got him
not for
kind
long.
Of tuckered out.
Yeah, those are great dogs.
Yeah.
But yeah, so and by the way, how did you come across the Reload in the first place? It was Forgotten Weapons, or how did you get interested in the Reload and decide to subscribe or become a member?
I think it was probably YouTube algorithm. I'm subscribed to like 3 or 4 different YouTube gun law channels, and I think it just kind of picks up. I know the algorithm for firearms content isn't that good, but stick around long enough, occasionally you get a good one through.
And what aspect of our coverage do you like? Is it the law stuff that interests you the most, or the politics side, or what do you tend to follow?
I'm more law interested. I think politics, this is part of it, actually. I'm not a big fan of the hyper partisan, I hate your guys' tie color, I like mine type deal.
Right.
We don't get that much here. It's more just reasonable people talking about firearms rather than culture war,
Right.
like attacking each other.
Right.
Yeah,
That is
and
what
I
we
like
try
the
to
law.
do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
So
Well, awesome.
that's always good. Tons of great guests.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. We do our best to try and, with the show, I try to have somebody on who's, an expert in whatever the topic of the week is, rather than just, the commentator or somebody like that. So hopefully that comes through in the guests that we book and the show that ends up, and try to do people from lots of different viewpoints as well, so that we're not just stuck in, an echo chamber essentially. But yeah, I mean, glad it sounds like that's part of the appeal for you, which I appreciate. But hey, look, we really appreciate you taking some time to come and share your story with us and give us a little bit better insight into the kind of people who make the Reload possible.
Well, thanks for putting out the content for how many years are we on?
Well, it's 3 years now.
3? Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't seem like that long, but and April 2021 is probably not when most people would have thought of launching a business, but it has worked out all right so far, thankfully.
Yeah.
But yeah, we really appreciate you doing this. And look, if other people want to have an opportunity to come on the show, it's one of the member benefits that you get if you buy a Reload membership. So hopefully people head over to thereload.com today and consider buying a membership. It supports our reporting here. That's how we make our revenue, so that we can actually write about all of the gun law developments that are going on, which there are quite a lot at this point in time. So, of course, you obviously also will get access to hundreds of pieces of analysis that you won't get anywhere else. That'll help you go deeper into the gun stories that we publish, get some additional insight into what's going on out there. And, you get this podcast a day early as well. So, you get the interview podcast a day early, among other things, among other benefits. So head on over and sign up today. But that's all we've got for this week. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We'll see you again real soon.